this podcast.
Hi guys, and welcome back to the Cast with Nair. I'm super excited to have you all back on the show. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing a very sensitive topic, one which is very important, and the topic is depression. A lot of people nowadays are slowly getting into depression, which which is leading them to committing suicide and having other mental health disorder problems. So we're going to be discussing depression and all of it today, how we can possibly avoid it, how to manage it, who to meet, the signs, the symptoms, everything that is to depression, and all of that. My guest today is Amanda Ihime. She's an architecture photographer and psychotherapist living and working in Lagos, Nigeria. She studied at the University of Cape Coast for a bachelor's degree in psychology and received a master's degree in clinical psychology from Swansea University. She is the founder and lead psychotherapist providing mental health services at NDD. Thank you so much, Amanda, for gracing my podcast, Cast with Nair. For quality assurance purposes and audio fidelity, you might be hearing some lags because this was recorded via Zoom. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'll just delve into what we have. So I said initially that I've already introduced what the topic is all about, depression, and we're going to be discussing all of it today. So I said, as a mental health professional, how would you define depression?
Okay, so depression is a mental health disorder, specifically a mood disorder that affects the way you feel about yourself and the way you feel about the world around you. It comes with a group of symptoms that are experienced over a period of more than 2 weeks. Now, before I get into what depression really means, like you were saying earlier, there's a tendency these days for people to talk about being depressed, just say that they're experiencing depression, and maybe even at times use it as an explanation for why they're not able to do certain things. Just check. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So as an explanation for why they're not able to do certain things, and I think that it's very important to differentiate between sadness, melancholy, and then depression. It's very normal for us to be sad as individuals. It's very human. We can't be happy every day. And just the same way that you wake up sometimes in the morning and you have days where you feel very uplifted, you feel very happy, you feel very positive, and you can't really pinpoint exactly what are the things that are making you feel happy. You just know you're in a really good mood. It's the same way that you can also wake up and feel like sad and feel a sense of despondency or despair about how some things are not working out the way you want them to, even just generally the stress of being alive and just knowing that with it comes sadness and with it comes misery. So it's very normal for us to be sad. And it's also normal for us to go through periods of melancholy, which is also sadness itself, whereas we're experiencing sadness for more than a day or more than 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Sometimes for some of us, it may last for like 6 days or even a week. And you feel a sense of sadness. And so this can also be attributed to some things around you not happening the way you want them to. Or maybe you've heard bad news and it's weighing you down and you feel really sad about it. Or, you had a misunderstanding with a friend and that's weighing on your mind and you feel sad about it. Or you watch the news and something negative is happening and you feel sad about that. So you can then have those moments of melancholy that can last for like more than 2-3 days because something bad has happened. But then when a person then comes into clinical depression, you have to fit into a certain criteria. And the two major things that we know or we use to identify, two major characteristics of depression that we use to identify or even begin a conversation of saying, okay, might this person be clinically depressed, are persistent low mood. That is, your sadness is persistent. And it's not just persistent for a day. It's not just persistent for an hour. It's not just persistent for 2 hours or even for 1 week. It's persistent for more than 2 weeks. So every day for the past 2 weeks, you must have been experiencing sadness. Now, alongside that, you also have to have a loss of interest in the things that you do in your daily life that would then cause a significant impairment in the quality of your life. So what that means is that if you're the kind of person who loves to go out and have a good time with your friends, you find that you no longer feel inclined to do that. If you're a person who enjoys going to the movies, there's a particular show you like to watch, just, visiting people. Even if you were staying indoors, you'd still have people come over. You All of a sudden, those things no longer interest you. And then you feel this very interesting desire to want to isolate yourself and stay away from everybody. And keep in mind that this has to have been ongoing for more than 2 weeks and also having a significant impairment in the quality of your life. So
Correct.
people are not able to see you, you're not able to complete tasks, you're not able to fulfill your responsibilities, you're also not able to see positivity in life. So these two major symptoms are two of the significant criteria that we need to see that a person has experienced before we can then say, okay, this person is depressed. But alongside these two, there are other symptoms that have to come with it as well. So what we then tend to see are people having changes in their sleeping habits. So they're either sleeping too much or they're sleeping very little. We also see changes in their appetite, where they're either eating too much or they're eating too little. We see changes in their energy levels, and more often than not, people who are depressed have very low energy levels. They don't feel motivated to do anything. They're tired all the time, and no matter how much sleep or how much rest they get, they still wake up tired. There's also an effect on your ability to concentrate. So if you could be sitting in front of your laptop or a book and trying to read something, but your ability to hold your attention and focus is impaired because you're struggling with concentrating. And then you can also have in your daily behavior, the way you talk to yourself, you can then notice it's starting to become a bit more negative. So you speak negatively of yourself, you blame yourself for things that have happened in your life and even things that have happened in other people's life, saying things like, the world would be a much better place without you in it. People would be happier if you were not here. You feel like you're just a burden to the people that love you. You're only causing people stress and misery, and you need to just leave them so that they can have peace of mind, that nothing good will happen to you, nothing good ever goes your way. So there is a negative sense of self that a person has when they are
Yes.
depressed. So there's a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. So you lose hope for the future and you feel helpless to being able to change the situation that you're in. So you feel stuck because whichever direction you get to, you find that you're hitting a wall and you can't seem to get yourself out of the darkness that you're feeling on the inside. So we also notice that people who are depressed also are sometimes very easily irritable. So things that would not upset them or irritate them that they could have easily looked over before, they become more irritable. We tend to notice that they isolate themselves, like I said before, and they cry a lot. And sometimes we may ask them, like, why are you crying? And they wouldn't be able to tell you. But then an event I went for, there was a lady who described it as, if you're already sad and miserable on the inside, you don't need anything on the outside to prompt you to begin to cry. So you're crying and you're really sad, your concentration is reduced, you're not having as much energy to do the things that you'd normally do. And then we see people in much more severe cases then begin to lean towards thoughts of suicide, which is, the world is a better place without me, I should most likely end my life. And some people go as far as planning it, and then some people go as far as taking their own lives. But yeah, so the severity of people's depression differs. Some people have a mild form of depression where the symptoms are present. They do fit the clinical diagnosis for depression. But what we then tend to see rather is that it's not, the impairment it has on their life is not so significant that they're not able to leave their house or function at work, but it is enough to cause them distress. And as it goes from mild to moderate to moderately severe to severe, the impairment on a person's life and the intensity of the symptoms and the frequency at which it happens then tends to increase. So you can have depression, just clinical depression on its own. You can also have depression alongside mania, which is when we then say a person has bipolar disorder. But the main focus of today's conversation is depression. It's a very long explanation, but I wanted to cover as much of it as I possibly could. So yeah, that's what depression is.
Wow. The definition alone of depression has covered basically all the questions I wanted to ask today. So, so the definition has encompassed everything that I had wanted to discuss, except but a few. But I'm really grateful for the explanation and the briefing of depression. The fact that you were able to differentiate between, depression, sadness, and melancholy. So many persons today might not understand or might not know this difference. They might feel everything is just depression. So I'm really glad that we're able to differentiate that. And then the impact, the early symptoms, when we should refer to something as depression and when we should refer to it as sadness or normal melancholy. So when it's up to 2 weeks, it's depression. When it's sadness, like your normal day as a person, when you just wake up and be happy, you can always also wake up and be sad as well. The same thing for the melancholy, that one just has a span of like 2 days or 3 days. So I'm really grateful for that difference.
Yeah.
We also talk about the impact, it can affect your a lot more that you have spoken about this evening. I'm really, really grateful. So we have spoken about the symptoms, the impact, and everything about it. But what's the first form of treatment? And you also mentioned that there are like different types of depression. I heard the bipolar disorder and the clinical depression, which I think the clinical and the bipolar are a major. Let's say the clinical is much more predominant today than the bipolar.
Well,
I've heard of few persons with bipolar.
Well, I don't have the research figures to be able to say there are more people with bipolar disorder than there are with major depressive disorder. I can't accurately state that. So I'll just leave that answer as I'm not sure. But we just tend to hear more of people talk about clinical depression. And also because there are sometimes in some other mental illnesses, depression is also a symptom of the illness and it's not the illness itself. So there are people who are suffering from depression simply because they are clinically depressed. And then there are people who are experiencing depression as a result of another mental illness. So like, let's say a person has a psychotic breakdown and right after that they have a depressive episode, or like, so you have like post-psychosis depression. Then we have people who are bipolar, where they're in a cycle where they've gone through a phase of mania and now they are depressed. Or you can have a person who has a personality disorder and the symptoms, living with that personality disorder has made some things not work out well for them, and so they're depressed. So they come in to treat depression, but then we find out that there are other illnesses. So which is why we recommend that you don't diagnose yourself or just go off of information online. They can be able to give you insight into what you might be struggling with, but it's always best to speak to a professional because we have the training and we understand some of these nuances that you may not be paying attention to or even know that you're supposed to pay attention to for a diagnosis. Because then you can come in and then say, oh, I'm depressed, and your clinician is going to focus on that as a way of respecting you as a client, because you also have a say in how your mental health care progresses.
Yes.
So they might, out of this, you insist on it and say, oh yes, it's depression that's causing this illness, and then the focus is on that particular illness, and we don't then recognize that there are other symptoms that you may not have mentioned or that we might have overlooked because of what you presented to us in your initial care. So it's just important that you're like, okay, even with the awareness that you have, that it's important to seek consultation to help with the proper diagnosis, to go through like all kinds of diagnostic assessments to be sure that is it just depression we're seeing, or are we seeing depression and something else? Yeah.
Okay. So how is depression diagnosed and how is it treated?
So to diagnose depression, if a person comes into, for my practice, for example, the moment you're registering, what we're doing, you're going to also fill out like a patient health questionnaire. And that questionnaire screens for the symptoms of depression, screens for the symptoms of anxiety disorder, specifically panic, and then also to help identify life stressors. So by the time you fill that out, I would look at the assessment and, based on my knowledge of the assessment, I can be able to say, okay, this client has communicated to me with what they've answered that there's, something going on. They are showing symptoms of depression. So we'd see the presence of at least 5 of all the symptoms I mentioned before, with the presence of persistent sadness over 2 weeks, and then also the lack of interest in doing things that they normally do. So we'd see that, and then we'd see that alongside other illnesses, and also see the severity of it. So once we see that in your results, When you then have your consultation session or your therapy session, you'll be asked some questions about your daily life, how you're able to cope with things, how are you feeling about yourself. And through those questions, we're also trying to see, okay, the things you feel on the questionnaire, what does it look like? How does it manifest in your day-to-day life? So that whatever we're seeing in a screening tool, we're also corroborating it with physical, behavioral experiences that you've communicated to us. So if by the time after having the diagnostic interview and then also having the screening tool being utilized, we can then be able to sit down and then come to a conclusion like, okay, the symptoms here are showing that this person has been experiencing this for the past couple of weeks. It has been persistent. It has impaired them in so and so ways. And thus, they do fit the criteria for the diagnosis of depression. So it requires a question, a conversation, a diagnostic interview with a therapist or a psychiatrist, and also the use of quantitative assessment tools to be able to screen for the severity levels and also for the presence of symptoms. And all this information together helps us to track the progress that you have whilst you're under treatment. So if you need medication, for example, okay, so I said that you need to speak to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to have a diagnostic interview with them. And after you have the diagnostic interview, we would assess the information we got from the interview with information we got from the screening tool. And with our knowledge, then come to the conclusion that this client fits the criteria for the diagnosis of clinical depression. And we also have situations where we have to look at the possibility of, are there any other mental illnesses and are there other things that are going on in their life? Like, are they on any medication that might impact one of the side effects might be their depression? Are they consuming, do they have like substance abuse as well? Because you could be drinking a lot and that can also put you in a state of depression. So we need to know, are there any other comorbid or alternative diagnosis that we can have that this client fits into? So the screening tool and the diagnostic interview gives us like a full picture of who you are as a person for us to be able to say, okay, you do fit the criteria for the diagnosis of clinical depression. So that's how it's diagnosed. Now, how is it treated? The thing about depression, more often than not, and most mental illnesses, those are like the ones that are not, genetic and hereditary, like schizophrenia, even those ones as well. A lot of them are triggered by significant life issues that have happened. So it's not just out of the blue, like, oh my goodness, one day you woke up and you were depressed. Kind of like the way physical illness can work, where you come in.
Really?
Yes, mental
That
illnesses.
sometimes it can be hereditary. Depression.
Yes. Sometimes mental illnesses are hereditary. We know that bipolar is hereditary. We know that depression is hereditary. We also know that there is heritable traits for schizophrenia as well. So when we say it's hereditary, there is a percentage rate for it. It's not like a communicable disease that you immediately get. So for anxiety, we know that there's a 60% chance of it being hereditary. And for depression, we're looking at 40 to 50% chance of it being hereditary. So it's genetic. And then for the other ones, I don't know the figures, but yes. And if it's more severe in families, if like a parent has very severe levels of depression, it also increases the chances of it being hereditary as well. So yes, you can inherit mental illnesses. So when we have to, but in the end, when we have to treat it, the severity levels of the clinical depression that you have, of clinical depression also helps dictate the treatment as well. So if I have a person who's coming in and they have like a severity level of mild depression, we're going to look at both the environmental factors and also the physical factors as well. Things that contribute to your mental well-being. So how are you eating? Is your diet okay? Are you getting in the nutrients that you need? Because you'd be so surprised how sometimes just changing your diet from being just like starch alone to things that have vitamins that your body needs, like you're having apples and oranges and pawpaw and drinking a lot more water and having more vegetables in your diet and reducing the amount of rice that you eat, that this very change can actually cause you to can alleviate some of the symptoms or even reduce the intensity of the feeling of depression. Then there's exercise. How often do you exercise? And this is not exercise because you want to lose weight, because that's what we've associated exercise with. If a person is working out they're doing it because they want to be slimmer. But the truth is that you need that exercise for physical strength, and you also need it for mental strength as well. With exercise, you're
Yeah.
able to burn off your stress hormone called cortisol, and you're able to release it during exercise, which is why, and then you also get a rush of dopamine after you've completed exercise, and dopamine makes you feel good. It's a pleasure hormone. So if you exercise, you feel better. So it helps to alleviate some of those symptoms as well. And the third thing we're looking at is, how are you sleeping? Are you getting enough sleep? Or are you just doing 4 to 5 hours of sleep? Because if you're not sleeping well, you're not going to feel tired. You're going to feel grumpy. You're not going to be motivated. You're going to be easily irritable. And you're not going to be able to make very good emotional decisions sometimes because of how irritable you might be feeling, or how tired or how grumpy you are. And that can then go on to affect your relationships. So it's important that the first few things, your physical health status is being checked. Do you have high blood pressure? Have you gone for a full physical health care checkup? So whilst we're looking at that, we're also looking now at your environmental factors. Okay, what's going on in your job life? Are you happy with your job? Are you happy with your friendships? Are you happy with your romantic relationships? Do you like the career that you're in? Are you unhappy with school? Is there something going on in your personal life that you realize that you're finding difficult to cope with? Have you lost something? Maybe you've lost a relationship, or someone you know or something you love has died or gone missing. So there are different situational or social factors that might be going on in your life. Did you experience trauma as a child when you were growing up? So, and by trauma, I mean something abusive, or even just like a
Yeah.
traumatic event itself, maybe like an accident, or you saw someone get beat up, or you saw a dead body on the road, like things that could be very shocking and difficult for the child mind to comprehend. What kind of family background did you have? How did your parents raise you? Did they build your self-esteem? Were you bullied at some point? Were you raised in a household that was psychologically abusive? So we'd look at all of these parts of your life. Look at your life as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. What are some things have happened to help understand your own patterns of behavior as a person, and how they connect to the symptoms that you're experiencing. So some people have really bad self-esteem and are not able to maintain healthy relationships and set boundaries in their lives. And because of that, they tend to have negative experiences in their relationships because they're just allowing any kind of people. And those people hurt them. And then they start to feel unwanted. And that then contributes to making them feel sad and then getting into a depressive state. So the moment we're able to help you do the work of building your self-esteem, you then start to have better quality of people around you. That is one challenge alleviated. And the thing about mental health care is that you don't really have to touch every single part, because in the healing of one thing, you end up touching so many things. So we can focus on healing your self-esteem and use your friendships as the starting points. But then you find out that the lessons you've learned in that place, you're taking it to your workplace, you're taking it to your family, you're taking it to church, you're taking it anywhere, any other part of your life that's important to you. So the healing of depression comes alongside physical health and environmental health, social well-being, spiritual well-being, and even personal well-being as well. Um, when you then start to go down the path of having severe depression, where it's significantly impacted your ability to live, that you're suicidal, then there's a lot more urgency that's provided for such a client, where we need to get them into a psychiatric hospital and get them stabilized, especially because that they're a danger to themselves and to others, possibly. So we need to make sure that they are stable and they're calm, and they can now begin to get inpatient treatment before they are taken out of the psychiatric hospital to now continue to receive outpatient care. For some people, it doesn't have to get to a point where we provide them with inpatient care. We can just have them start medication at home, where we monitor their medication regularly with the psychiatrist. So we work with a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist alongside. So we're looking at the dosage, and the goal is to help you live a healthy life without having to be dependent on medication as a way of surviving. But for some people, like I said, it may be something they will have to take for the rest of their lives, and for some, it's something they can wean themselves off of. So different people have different ways of responding or reacting to or
To
experiencing the
treatment.
symptoms, yes, to treatment as well. So the treatment can range from drug therapy and psychotherapy up until the point where it's so severe that we're doing electroconvulsive therapy. But that's in far much
Really?
more severe cases. Yes.
Wow. That's a lot to take in, in how many minutes? But this is like a full lecture on
I
depression.
know. I
But
know.
I really, really appreciate this. Thank you so much, Amanda. So now you have spoken a lot about the treatment and different treatment depending on how severe your own case is. So that means this is good to say that the first form of treatment is like having a therapy session
Yeah.
where you get to know your sleeping habits, eating habits, you get to know your more about your environment, your friends, your social life, and everything around you that can help facilitate your healing. So the first form is usually therapy. Now, speaking of therapy, some people most times, let's say the young adults and the youth in this generation, most times when we hear of suicide, when it's stress, it's usually maybe depression, sadness, and all of that. A lot of people commit suicide today and they tag it to be depression. I had no one to speak to, I had no one to communicate to. And you're like, okay, since therapy is there, how do these people access therapy? How do they speak to people? Because sometimes it's not like they don't want to speak to people, but when they speak to people, do they actually help? And they just keep wallowing in that distress and sadness without any change occurring. So therapy is a very good method of treating it. But how do people access this therapy? Access like professionals like you. I mean, I know Indeed is there, which is your platform, which is also there to help people. But people that, let's say students like me and other people living in the rural areas that cannot access this, and on a daily basis, the rate of suicide is increasing because these people cannot get access to at least the basic form of treatment. What's your say about that?
Um, it's both an economical problem and also a medical one as well, with government one. I don't even know how to explain it, but frame that part.
Yeah.
First of all, the number of qualified, trained, licensed clinical psychologists that we have in the country is not enough. We don't have enough for the number of people that we have. So there's already a scarcity. Even at the practice, we are constantly trying to like manage the flow of clients that we have so that we're getting, so that we're able to like, provide quality care, because we have to refer cases out. And a lot of people have specialized cases where they need specialized care. So you need like a family therapist, or you need a couples therapist, or you need someone who works with children, or someone who's familiar with a particular neurodevelopmental disorder. So we need specializations, we need general mental health practitioner as well. So there's a shortage in terms of people to take up these roles. But thankfully, Buhari signed the mental health bill, and that has already begun to changes have begun to take place. It's not to say that it's going to significantly increase the number of people who come for therapy, but it's a good start. Then there is a second part about the fact that mental health is not something that, as much as there are people talking about it a lot, it's more like they know it, but the doing and the feeling of it and the adapting or adopting of it's not something that they're doing. So it's like we're knowing and we're talking, but we're not moving. So because of that, there's still a lot of people that are ignorant about mental wellness. There are people who don't understand it, and people who have never ever heard anyone talk about it. So there is that, and then there are people who do not want to have anything to do with it. So there is the lack of awareness, and then there's also the lack of awareness, and then lack of access to information about mental health care, and then the willingness to change, and lack of education as well. So I mean, if they were teaching children in school that as the same way you teach them head, shoulder, knees and toes, you also teach them about the brain and the mind and taking care of their health, then a lot more people would know. But there's not enough education going around. So that lack of knowledge also contributes to it. So then in terms of access as well, if you don't have enough people talking about or teaching psychology, or enough graduates coming out of psychology and getting jobs as therapists, where are you going to get hospitals at? Who's going to build a clinic for people to? Nobody's going to work there. So because of that, there's also places that they don't have psychologists and psychotherapists, because nobody's studying that. No, there's no building, no access, no clinic. So there's actually no physical space for them to go. Then there is economic issue, which is that okay, so there are now available places where you can get mental health care, but can people afford it? That's another thing. They can't afford it. And I know people say therapy is expensive, therapy, but if we had to break down what it takes to, if we had to break down what it takes to, sorry, the network is a bit shaky now. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Loud and clear.
Okay. So
I can hear you.
if we had to break down what it takes to run a mental health practice, it's going to be quite,
It's a lot.
it's a lot. It's a lot. It's not as easy as people think, which is just, I'm just gonna go in here, sit down, and then that's it. And listen to your problems. No, there's so much more that goes on behind the scenes to make that even accessible and available for you. So, so because of that, therapy is a bit pricey, but we as therapists, we've tried to make it as competitive as possible. But even at that, still, there will be people who cannot afford therapy. So there is the economic part of it where for the paid services, people just can't afford it because they're just not making that much money and the inflation is not getting any lower. So that's also another issue. But then at the same time, there are still NGOs that offer free mental health care. I know there are many NGOs that do that. There are NGOs that offer counseling to people as well. And also if you happen to meet a therapist, you can always discuss with them like, okay, I can't afford this. So are there any, compromises? Are there any, adjustments that can be made for me so that I can be able to, what you may call it, I can be able to afford therapy for myself. So yeah, so that's it. So therapy is pricey, access is difficult, but there are places where you can get free care, and there are also places that you can also get discounted care as well.
Wow, that's nice. That's nice. Thank you so much. So, but do you mind? Do you mind listing the NGOs that are available so that people out there, when this podcast is out, I mean, people that can afford it, they can always reach out to those people. I know there is Indidi, which is your own platform. So, guys, you can also reach out to Amanda. She has a platform, Indidi, which is, hell bent on mental health disorder and alleviating it. So, do you mind mentioning some of them too?
There is mentally aware. There is what should we call it? There is 1 second. Let me just try and find their names. There's Assad, which is anti-suicide and depression squad, and then there is also Psych Babble as well. So I'll just send them to you as DMs so that you can provide links to people when they do listen to the podcast.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that would do. So, if I ask my, if I wrap it up, I would love to ask my last question. Mm-hmm. So, how can depression be prevented?
It takes active
as an individual.
It takes active individual personal work as a person to be able to prevent depression. For some of us, we're just born in situations and we're born in bodies where when something significant happens, we're less tolerant of it compared to how another person will be. So if you do end up being depressed, give yourself grace. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or you're a bad person. It's just as the same thing like mosquito bites you. Some people will get malaria and some people won't. But to prevent it, it's conscious daily work. So like I said, making sure that you're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're working out, exercise, they will help very well. Having good mental health practice, there's things that help your mental well-being stay balanced, which are, journaling to express your thoughts, going for counseling or therapy regularly, making sure that you're honest with yourself, you have good friendships in your life, like a healthy support system, that you're in a job that you love. And if you don't love it, you find a way to accept it if you can't leave it, or you're making plans to leave it, but you're doing something that brings you joy. You're creating a life that you're content with, not a life that you're comparing to others consistently, but that you're accepting for yourself. It involves being kind to yourself, treating yourself with ease and softness, not just everyday fight, everyday
Yeah.
but like sometimes just calm down. It involves self awareness, and that's a continuous practice of knowing yourself, which is what are the things that make me upset and what are the things that make me happy? What are the things that make me
Thank.
smile and the things that make me cry? So, and how do I react to certain situations? And the way I react, are these ways of reacting good for me? Are they healthy, or do they end up with me losing relationships or losing friendships? So it's constant daily work, constant self-reflection, constantly being able to look at yourself and be honest with yourself about who you are, and changing up some bad habits, and then also doing that physical work of sleeping well and eating well, and exercising and resting as well.
And that happens a lot on social media, well, and doing well for himself or herself. And you find yourself comparing yourself to the person. Everything is just leading to jealousy or downcast, you're sad. Ah, God, I'm not, like, what am I doing for my life? See, this person is like this person. And that's how it starts. So, what's your say on that? Because I know it costs a lot. It does a lot to people, social media.
Yes, that's true. Sorry, did you ask me a question?
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to know, like, if it has a. Okay. So I was speaking of the impact of the social media on mental health, and I was saying that I know for a fact that it has a huge impact. Sorry, it has an impact, but I don't know how intense the impact is. Because what you were saying earlier about the preventive measures was, I mean, that's what led to my question on social media. Because we're speaking of comparison and all of that. I know that happens a lot on social media. So, what's your say on the impact of social media on the mental health, especially depression? Because that happens a lot. There's a lot of comparison going on. And how can we avoid? Because it's something that we can really not avoid. Because you come online every time and you're seeing these things. Some people that are still upcoming, they cannot avoid it because they're always online. And now that this is the computer age, a tech age, everybody's always online. So these things that you cannot run away from. You're always in a world like this currently that is social media inclined. And we still get to be normal. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, social media definitely does have an impact on our mental health. And really, it's dependent on how we as individual society use social media, because it's there, but then you still have control over it. So some people prefer to spend a lot of their times and use it to avoid their problems. And when you're not feeling good, you go to social media, you post something, people give you comments, and that gives you like a dopamine rush, and then you feel great. But then you're gonna come back down to it. So if you use social media as a way to avoid dealing with your emotional challenges or dealing with your real life practical issues, then that's no good for you, because then you're not really growing. You're just staying in the same place and avoiding your problems. But social media can also be a tool that can help you grow. If you're then realizing, okay, I'm a person who's struggling with depression, or a person who's struggling with this particular issue, and I want to get better at it, you can be able to find resources of people who have been through the same thing that you have been, and learn from how they've been able to overcome it. You can even then access help as to how you can be able to overcome some of the challenges that you're experiencing. But all in all, I'd say that it's important for everyone to limit their social media usage, even for people who have to have a career on social media. You will post on your pages and you'll engage with your customers, your clients, but you don't have to be on social media straight for an hour. You can have like 15-minute bursts, you can have like 30-minute bursts where I'm going to be on my phone because I have to do this, and be intentional. When you go on the app and you say, okay, what am I coming here to do? Is it to look at people's stories? When you look at their stories, Is it to respond to DMs? When you respond to DMs, you go away. Is it because you want to watch somebody's video or share something? Once you do that, you go away. So you have
Yeah.
to find times when you are not on, because it's so easy to just mindlessly scroll on social media, and before you know it, a whole hour has gone by of your day. But if you're intentionally or consciously using it, you'll be able to identify what are the most productive times I'm on Instagram, and then use this for, or what are the times when I need to be on Instagram because I need to be productive, and do that. And once that time is gone, you just enjoy tiny little pockets of enjoyment. Okay, let me just post this here or see this person's post and then leave it. So manage your use of social media and be intentional about what it is that you want to see, because the things that you're seeing would eventually feed your mind. If I constantly show you pictures of negative things that are happening all over the world, you're only going to think that negative things are happening in the world.
True.
But if I show you a mix
Exactly.
of different things, you have a balanced view of life. So you can use your what you're looking at on the social media to help craft the mental space that you want to live in your world. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I have
You're
such a
very
whole lot
welcome.
of knowledge that you have, shared today, and I'm really, really grateful.
Thank
Actually, I'm
you.
sure that the last part, this one on the impact of social media, will really have a huge impact on people, because this is something that we face every day. And for the fact that you have addressed it, saying that we should be intentional about why we come online. Don't just come online and be strolling like someone that does not have direction, or like a skiller. There's no direction. You're just scrolling for scrolling's sake. So that's in a way tries to protect our mental space, gives us a balanced kind of a mental space, and then what we see most times affects us as humans. So there's a lot in there, and I'm really grateful. So before we call this a wrap, do you have any last words to say? Anything to say to the listeners, the viewers, on depression, mental health, and everything? Just a last word to say before we call this a wrap.
Um, don't underestimate the impact of your physical health on your mental health. That is getting enough sleep, rest, eating well, drinking water, and exercising. Even if all you do for exercise is strolling for 1 hour, do not underestimate that. And imbibe very, really good daily practices like meditation, practicing mindfulness, that's being in the present moment, because especially for people who are anxious, when you find yourself worrying about the past or being anxious about the future, it's always good to ask yourself, okay, but what is going on right now in my life, like in this present day? You can bring yourself back to reality. So, and then journaling as a way of learning how to express your emotions or communicate it is also very important. And that you should also not underestimate the importance of detailed, open, and honest communication with other people, because it can help to resolve a lot of issues and challenges in your life. So, yeah, those are the tips that I have.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I really
You're very
appreciate
welcome.
this.